You can build billion-dollar businesses just with your tech being on top of OpenAI or some of the open source models. I think there'll be many billion-dollar industries, and they're gonna be working on these open source LLMs and OpenAI, and anybody can build an AI. Yes, you're right, because it's so easy to build software with all the tools that are out there. There's so many early stage startups. We've talked to 50 other people with the exact same idea as yours. So it's not the idea that's necessarily gonna blow us away, but your approach to it. Like, what's your strategy to build this thing? How are you going to get your first 100 customers? Like, tell me why you're going to beat all the other 50.
Vanessa, thank you so much for joining our startup podcast today. You are a partner at NEA and especially interested in AI startups. I would love to learn about what type of AI startups are you currently really liking in terms of maybe hardware, infrastructure, or some vertical AI applications or horizontal. Whatever. What do you like the most?
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to get to talk to you and your audience. I've always been excited about horizontal SaaS. I worked at Box for many years before I joined NEA, and I just saw the power of cross-team collaborations. And I just get very excited when you start breaking down the silos in organizations and allowing information to flow freely in order for people to get their work done more efficiently. So things that are workflow related, things that are, there's design that's really important to how people adopt it and how people use the software. I've seen a lot of interesting things in vertical SaaS, but I think it's a little harder for me to get conviction in some of those areas personally.
Why? Because you're lacking the specific industry insights to make a decision, or because it might be not easy to scale the business to $1 billion company? What is the reason why you would prefer horizontal AI versus vertical?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. I think when you're looking at horizontal, you look at the buyers, right? And the buyer is the CIO, the CMO, the CRO, right? The chief revenue officer, the chief marketing officer, the chief product officer, the chief technology officer, the chief information officer. So you know the buyers, and we spend a lot of time with these buyers in our networks, right? From within our startups and within big Fortune 500 companies, we spend a lot of time understanding what are the challenges, where are there opportunities, explain to me the workflow, explain your tech stack. And so we spend a lot of time researching, and the research compounds. And then we meet founders, right, that are tackling some of these areas. We're like, oh, that's a neat perspective on that stack. And so I get to see an opportunity or a gap in the software stack for a buyer in like a 360 view. I hear it from the buyer. I hear it from startups trying to tackle it. I hear it from the incumbents and what they're doing to respond. And so month over month, year over year, you just get this depth of knowledge. So when I see a startup that's like, here's how I'm tackling this opportunity, I'm like, yes, that checks like all these boxes, and I know the users are going to be excited to use it, and the buyer's going to buy it, and you're at the right price point, and I know the incumbent's not thinking about it that way, and like, let's do it, right? That's a horizontal like approach. Now, when you're thinking about vertical SaaS, right, they'll come in and like, we are vertical SaaS for organic strawberry farmers. I'm like, okay, I don't know anyone here. And so like, it's going to take me months to ramp up and to get that depth that I have in like the CMO as a buyer. So I go in and do all that research. And then for one reason, I'm like, maybe the product's not there. Maybe the price is not right. Maybe the distribution strategy doesn't make a ton of sense. We pass. I won't see another company targeting those people ever. So it's basically like I take all that research, crumple it up into a ball, toss it in the trash can, and then the next horizontal SaaS. And we're like, we are for construction of industrial blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, here we go. I don't know. So it doesn't compound. It takes a lot longer. And again, to get that conviction of like, yes, I get it. It just takes so much. I never say never. Every time I said never in venture, I like very short order invest in something in that category. So I won't say I won't do any of these deals. I still think they're really interesting, and I enjoy learning about some of these verticals. But I have been able to get that kind of conviction that I've gotten with horizontal SaaS.
I mean, if I look at horizontal versus vertical, I'm on your line because if I'm looking at horizontal, you have less moving parts, less critical assumptions to check. Because as you said, it's much easier for me to identify the buyer, the ICP, which means I can reduce the risk by how do I actually get in touch with those? How do I build this kind of leads? How do I convert them? And this is from the startup perspective, but also, of course, from your perspective. Because if you don't understand the business model or can somehow assess the likelihood of this going big, you would not take this risk, because then the failure rate is too high given the potential of growth. And on the other hand, if you have only one, like this, you are targeting CMO and trying to solve a problem for him with some kind of AI marketing software, for example, you have a very, very limited problem set that you are trying to solve for them. If you are looking for a vertical kind of set, then you need to solve a problem for procurement. You need to solve some kind of problem for marketing, and then it is some kind of operations as well. And then having like 5 or 6 stakeholders in a company, all being in alignment of you making this kind of choice. And if not, if you are not good at this, then you need to target the very, very small companies. So in your example, the small organic farms, which is not giving you the potential of building a $1 billion company, because you need to be targeting the Fortune 5000.
Yeah, I think that's right. Now, what I will say is that it's not that you can't build a really great business. It's just that different businesses have venture-like outcomes. Other businesses have really good outcomes, but that don't align with the venture business model. And so just because it's not venture backable doesn't mean it's not a good business. And I was just meeting with an entrepreneur yesterday about it, and his startup was very vertical SaaS. It was not venture fundable, and he bootstrapped it and then he sold it for a massive outcome. It would never have been a good venture return if I had invested, but for him and his employees, they got the sizes of returns that a lot of our successful companies have gotten. And so like the returns to the founder and the employees can be just as big, whether or not it's a venture fundable or non-venture fundable business. So I do want to like tease that out.
Yeah. If we look at the horizontal AI business models, what type of functions or business problems do you think we could solve right now if we wanted to start like a $500 million company?
I'm very intrigued by the office of the CFO. I think
Mhm.
Microsoft Excel has had a death grip on the office of the CFO. There's nothing wrong with Excel. I think Excel's a really powerful tool. It's almost like a programming language. But the
Mhm.
problem is it's not hooked up to backend systems. It rarely updates in real time. It can't do a lot of things, and it certainly isn't a language that a lot of people in the rest of the organization speak. And so I've always felt gosh, came to light really obviously for me during COVID. When COVID first hit and everything shut down in the United States, we were like, okay, so what does that do to our burn? What does that do to our revenue? What is our pipeline? So we had to like, sales went off to reforecast. HR went to like, what are all the head count that we've added for different things that like obviously aren't like if we're going to do international expansion, it's probably not going to happen right now because flights are frozen, right? So everyone was taking stock and everyone was reporting back relatively quickly. Like CRO actually has some pretty great tools at their disposal. The HR team took a little longer, but they were missing context behind the roles of the headcount. But the CFO was just like, let me call you back in 2 days. I need to like manually change. I'm like, you mean like, well, we have to pull all of these different reports from these different places and then put them in the spreadsheet. And I was just like, this is so manual. And they were the ones, and their teams would stay up all day, all night to try to like get information out quickly. And it was just the bottleneck in every company, no matter the size, right? No matter the sophistication, it was just so obvious how manual all the processes were and how insular the office of the CFO was compared to like all the other teams were collaborating. Like HR was talking to product and engineering to try to figure out who was doing what, and they were talking to marketing, and like everybody seemed to like work really with each other all the time. And the CFO was like, "Oh, we got this it was like information comes to us, we build reports, we give it to the CEO." And it was just, I was like, wow, like there's so much opportunity here to just like streamline the workflows, to get you more real-time information, to get you collaborating, because the more context you have around why these numbers are the way they are, the better decisions that office of the CFO can make. And that can drastically change the trajectory of a company. If you get better at managing, like predicting what your burn is going to be and predicting what your revenue is going to be, and you can get really good about how you manage your cash flow, that changes how much money you need to raise from venture. That changes the types of valuations you'll get. Like it really changes things. And so I'm really excited about the office of the CFO. And if you layer on top of that, all the really interesting things happening in B2B fintech, the rails on which all of this is operating is getting interesting. I think there's a lot of cool accelerants that are all like can enable the office of the CFO to drastically change in the next couple of years?
When I look at the CFO office, I mainly see two things. So one thing is what you just said is like data integration, which is a big issue, especially if you are in a bigger corporate where you have like 50, 100, 200 different data sources for that you need for personal expenses, then marketing expenses, sales expenses, some travel expenses, whatever, you name it. Yeah. And then and then maybe you have like different accounting systems in different countries and so on, and then you need to all merge them. That's a very fun job. I mean, if you are, I think for this type of enterprise customer, whew, very, very, very hard problem. But it's most likely more of a service-based business because it's very, very unique. So the situation of the company and the data sources that you need to combine and so on. So therefore, I guess building a subscription-based business for them might be hard. But if we are talking about some kind of standardized business models, like for example, SaaS companies, or maybe even some kind of general e-commerce companies, doing something for them, because if you are talking about a SaaS company, and I'm doing a super oversimplified version, yeah, then you basically you need a Stripe API because that's where they most of them are collecting the payment. Maybe some kind of advertising like Google AdWords, Facebook, or maybe some kind of accounting system which you already use, and then plug it in, and then you basically have your real-time data feed, basically, where you can create your standard income statement report, balance sheet, and cash flow statement, and so on and forth. But now the fun stuff, and we are talking about AI, and they are doing like business planning, for example. Yeah, and then why can't you do a Gen AI created financial model, which is, for example, imagine I'm the CFO, I'm saying, hey, ChatGPT, here is all my data dump. You got it. There are all the historicals in there. Now, I want you to prepare three scenarios. Scenario one, we want to expand heavily by investing into Facebook ads and SEO. And we also want to add this new product line. And this is how the pricing works. Please prepare a financial model for me. 1 minute later, you got your draft model. Of course, you would need to have someone going over it so there are not like functional errors in there or some kind of totally crazy hallucinations. You're making decisions, huge decisions are based on wrong input data and calculations. I mean, you're not better off. Yeah, then you would rather wait for 2 days or so if the decision quality is better. And here's another thing. I see that Excel is like an offline product. It's not really connected to anything, yeah, except maybe in the Microsoft universe. Why is Google Docs not entering this? I mean, they are basically online. Everybody can plug into it. There are already plugins, also from using ChatGPT data, for example, where you can automatically fill in some kind of cells, etc. If I'm looking at the problem that you are trying to tell me, and I don't want to maybe solve the problem with the APIs, because maybe I only want to solve the financial planning scenario building stuff. And there normally, and then the pitch would be instead of investing $2,000 for a human being doing the work for 1 week or whatever, you just pay us $250, $500, and you get the result immediately. Yeah, so it's cheaper and instantly. Is there nobody doing something like that?
Why is Google not doing this? Because it is verticalizing like use cases for Excel. And I think they're just trying to add features kind of across that are as applicable to everybody as possible. And so I don't think they've ever built Google Sheets to be truly a competitor to Microsoft Excel. Like it doesn't have all the bells and whistles that Excel
Yeah.
has. And so I think they were saying it like Excel's for the power user, Google Sheets is kind of for everyone else. It's been my read on it. I'm not a PM. I don't at Google, never have been, but that's kind of been my read. And so I don't know that they'll go down something that specific. So I think it does get to the like you would need a company that wants to go pretty deep. We founded a really interesting company called Grid, and they wanted to go, they have been going after some of the power user use cases, and that's grid.is. But it's you have to like hit the right use case with the right buyer at the right price point, and then understand their workflow and do that end to end. And so we've been iterating on that for several months, and then layering on AI. But I think it's really hard to start AI first. To just say like, what's AI gonna make better in Excel? Because you can throw it in every place and then solve no one's end-to-end use case particularly well. So what I do think is like focus on a persona, focus on a use case, and then get that one use case end to end, and then build on all the use cases on top of that. And I do think the trick is for that end to end use case, it has to be a really important one. Because if you just pick something that someone does once a month, then you're going to be building for a while before like you have real value and stickiness. So I think there's a lot of it's more like an art than a science to figure out like what's that use case and that persona that you're going to first build it manually and then layer on AI on top of it and then wow people and then keep going. It's not easy.
Vanessa, you also made some other great observations when looking at the AI landscape. One observation is related to that you see many AI startups making sales from enterprise customers, etc. But actually, those enterprise customers are not that sticky. Can you tell us more about it?
So, what I'm seeing in the market is that a lot of enterprise buyers have created a line item in their budget to experiment with AI. That's exciting because that means that there's money for a lot of very early stage startups to land some very interesting big customers. So that's exciting because there's like you have an in because they have this budget of like play money. Like you get 50 grand and you get 50 grand. And it's like everyone's like, yes, great, awesome. To get that account before this like experimental line item would have taken years and like tons of referenceable customers, but now everyone's super open-minded. That's very exciting. But it's a double-edged sword. The risk of that is that it's play money. And so everybody's getting the 50K, not everybody, but it's a lot easier to get that 50K, 100K. And for a startup to get 10 of these customers, 100K each, million ARR, boom, did it in less than a year. That used to be so hard. And now if you're in that AI line item budget, you get like a fast pass through procurement, a fast pass through everything, because all these enterprises are like, well, we have to buy these products, we need to learn. The problem is that it's not a real budget and you don't necessarily have a real champion. And they're buying a lot of stuff. And they're probably buying you, your competitor, and Microsoft's competitive version of it. And they're doing a bake-off. And instead of calling it an RFP, they're just like, 10 people are going to use this, 10 people are going to use this, 10 people are going to like, we'll see what happens. And the scarier part is a lot of companies are like, okay, we're going to experiment, we're going to play with this, and then we're going to figure out like, can we build this ourselves? Right? Using open AI stuff is pretty easy. Like, what of these things can we build ourselves and what can we not build? So where you think you landed a 1 year, 2 year deal at 50K, 100K a year, the buyer doesn't think of you that way. The buyer is still dating around. They have not really committed to you, even though it might feel like that. So I would call it, it's not like a permanent relationship. It is not an exclusive, I'm committing to you and that's why I bought you or bought your software. So they're churning faster than ever. And you're like, well, how are they churning if like they've deployed it? It's like, well, they've deployed it into small groups and they haven't integrated all their systems into it. And like they are really tiptoeing into it, right? They haven't done all the change management. They haven't written all the instruction manuals. They haven't done a whole press release with their internal teams to get everyone trained. They're kind of just using it, seeing if they like it. They'll use it for a year or two, and then maybe they build it themselves, or maybe they use Microsoft's version and they rip you out, but they're not going all in. And so if you're a startup, my advice is if you're AI and you got that sale really fast, you should be excited and then be very paranoid and be like, how do I get them to integrate it into everything? How do I get it across teams? How do I message this to my champions of how different I am than Microsoft or my competitors? You're still selling. Like you just have to just imagine that it's like not, that it's just a year-long RFP. So you can't just let your guard down. You can't just like check, I got the deal, moving on to the next deal. And the other thing I tell founders I work with is find the actual sponsor. Because if the sponsor is the chief innovation officer or the AI ambassador, like all these titles I'm seeing now, they're responsible for buying AI and evaluating it. Like that's not going to be the person that like really adopts it. So if it is for the CRO, great. That if AI advisor, whatever that bought the software and championed it, keep them on your good side, but get to the CRO or get to the CMO and like build that relation and then get it into their actual real budgets, like their real software budgets that get scrutinized every year. And that's really hard to get those deals. Like move from the AI budget to your actual like champion budget within a year. And so I think that's probably the way to play it. Otherwise, there's a very high likelihood that this customers or all your customers are up for churn in a year. It's just a different game, Martin. It's such a different game than it was a year ago.
Yeah, I mean, if your revenue is like 50% or 80% based on play money, I mean, that's not really sustainable.
But we don't know that because we haven't had play money in IT budgets in like 20 years. So
Yeah.
I don't blame people for being like, I'm not in play money. That's not a real thing. I'm like, well, it used to not be, but now it is. And we just have to adapt. That's tech, right? We just have to adapt. Every couple years, we have to adapt to the new rules.
And if you're looking at Gen AI and the startups pitching to you because they're trying to raise 1 million, 2 million in funding for the early stage company, what is the percentage of those Gen AI startups that are actually only having some kind of prompt engineering and then building on top of other infrastructure companies like ChatGPT, etc.? What is the percentage rate? Because my guess would be like 90% plus.
Yeah, a lot. But I know a lot of VCs are very worried about that. But I'm personally not as worried if that's what your company is, as long as like you have a strength somewhere else or an insight somewhere else. Maybe you have an amazing distribution channel. Maybe you have an amazing something. You go back to like when AWS came out, everyone was like, oh, now anybody with a computer can like, now you don't have to set up your servers, blah, blah, blah. Like you just spin up AWS and use their services. Anybody can build a cloud SaaS company. It's like, yeah, yeah. And a lot of people did. A lot didn't work, and then some broke out. I think when you think of the OpenAI APIs and some of the open source models, like it's just it's just like AWS but for AI. Like anybody can build an AI. Yes, you're right. And some of them are not going to most of them are not going to work and some of them will, even though they have no technical moat. If you think back, like very few SaaS companies, you're like, ooh, what a very interesting technical moat you have, right? It's always like you had a really good virality loop. You had amazing design. You had, one reason or another, things were just going, you were breaking out. And so I think those rules apply in the world of generative AI.
And what are the top two or three examples that you can give me for Gen AI applications that are for either a specific function or for a specific industry where you really think like, oh, they basically only use like one or two other either open source models or paid LLM models, etc. But they are actually working very well and they have some kind of unique either messaging or a really unique distribution way or positioning or whatever. And still they will be able to build maybe 10 million, 30 million ARR. Maybe they will not become $1 billion company, but if that's not the goal for some people, and if they are still happy for making whatever, I don't know, 100 million, 200 million exit, it's still life-changing for the founder. Maybe not the most awesome outcome for a VC, but what type of companies have you seen over there?
Gosh, that's a good question. Look, I think that you can build, for the record, billion-dollar businesses just on with your tech being on top of OpenAI or some of the open source models. I do think you can build billion-dollar businesses. I think in customer support, I think there'll be many billion-dollar industries, and they're gonna be working on these open source LLMs and OpenAI, and they'll probably use a mix of all of them for the right reasons, and probably some of the small LLM models. So yeah, I actually think you can build them. I think customer support's an obvious one. I think in like more niche ones, maybe creating ad copy or just doing like automatic bidding, right? Seeing when an ad converts really well, doing an iteration on that, bid against that, and just like automating some of the bids and copy to optimize the things that are working and just kind of operate in the background. Can that be $1 billion? It depends, but it can make money. Probably. That's a very tedious job that no one likes to do. So, that might work. So I think there's a lot. From big to small to who knows, maybe you create a new market. And for me personally, I'm very excited about founders that are thinking about entirely new markets or like serving people something that they've like never, like, I don't know, SMB, SEO or whatever. I don't know how many SMBs are really sophisticated with their SEO or with, bidding on AdWords, but if maybe you can open up a whole new market, that to me is really interesting. So I like serving a whole population that's been underserved for a while or just creating an entirely new market that no one knows what the TAM's going to be, but you have a really good idea of why you can make that a big TAM. Those are the areas I'm excited about because those are the areas that the large incumbents aren't looking at. Everything else I think the large incumbents are moving quickly and defending their turf in ways we've never seen before.
Yeah.
And that's scary for a startup, right?
I mean, because you said it like with customer support software, all those bigger ones that you know before they were framing themselves as SaaS, and now they are like, oh, we are the AI customer support software. This is the main positioning right now. So, and of course, if they have like 500 or 1,000 employees and you are just like a five-man company, it might be a little bit hard to fight against those. But this brings me to my next question. I really love underserved, big, boring industries because if the smartest people do not go there, but still there's lots of economical transactions in there, might be worth exploring. What are the top three most boring industries that you can think of right now, where you really think like, wow, I mean, this is only 50, 60-year-old people working over there, working like 9 to 5, not really hard, but still pushing trillions in dollars of economical value.
Gosh, I don't spend a lot of time in this area, but I think like think of manufacturing, you think of energy. I mean, energy does pay really well. It depends on what energy you're in. Actually, I think energy is interesting because there's a lot of money in it. There's a lot of demand for it. They can pay well. And I would say they're probably early on the earlier adopter side, but very largely underserved in some cases. Manufacturing and industrials, I think, is interesting. I know a lot less about this, but we have a venture partner, Jeff Immelt, who's the former CEO of GE. And I love to talk to him about this stuff because I'm like, I'm looking at the software that helps qualify inbound blah blah blah. And he's like, can you please go look at something to help my like turbine manufacturing plant? Or like, can you look at, I don't know, like jet engines? And I'm like, Jeff, I know absolutely zero about jet engines. You're going to have to help me here. So I always joke with him because GE, like huge business, very diversified. And there's an argument to me that they're underserved from Silicon Valley startups in a lot of areas of their business.
Any other tips you would like to share with founders who are trying to raise some money right now for their SaaS or AI company?
Look, I think the name of the game right now is differentiation. There's so many because it's so easy now to build software with all the tools that are out there. There's so many early stage startups. I think it'd be silly to think that a VC has only spoken to one other person with your idea. Like, just assume that we've talked to 50 other people with the exact same idea as yours. So it's not the idea that's necessarily going to blow us away, but your approach to it. Like, what's your strategy to build this thing? How are you going to get your first 100 customers? Like, tell me why you're going to beat all the other 50. It cracks me up when they're like, we're the best. And they show like a 2x2 and it's only like old incumbents. And I'm like, yeah, okay, but there's like 50 people in your quadrant. Like, this doesn't help. I need you to tell me how you're going to win this. How are you going to get your customers? How are you going to how are you going to support them? Is that differently? How are you going to, maybe your product roadmap and how you layer things on is going to be really interesting, but you have to have some insights that we haven't heard before. And it's unlikely that it's your idea that we haven't heard before.
And how do you validate the quality of the founder then, so that the founder and idea match is quite good? Is it just that you see like, oh, the person was working like 10 years in this industry or function, or had some kind of exposure to this kind of problem that he's trying to solve? Or is it really like somebody who does not have deep experience in this specific problem, but with a tangential problem where he was working like for 10 years and he was maybe doing one or two other businesses before, but not in the specific area. But you see that how he thinks and approaches this type of problems, so that you think like, oh, his approach to defining the go-to-market strategy or calibrating his business model, this is what I actually like. What is more important for you? That you see that the mindset and mental model of how the founder thinks, is this more important, or is it more important that somebody has like 10 years or so problem exposure?
Look, I think the truth is I'm looking for, does she have the competitive edge? Like, does she have some interesting insight that others don't? And maybe it's from working there in the industry for 10 years, or maybe it's consulting in the industry for 1 year, but she saw something that's broken here, but works really well in this other industry. And so she's going to bring that to this and maybe it'll work, right? It's what's your unique insight that you have that no other people have, or very few people understand well. You can get that insight many different ways. And so that's really what I'm looking for. And then I'm looking for really like tenacity and grit and perseverance. It's a long road, and being really smart or having a lot of experience doesn't mean that you're going to have the stamina to do this for the 10, 15 years it requires. So I look for how deeply passionate are you? Like, are you going to be able to persevere with all the twists and turns? Like the things some of our founders have gone through with COVID and then the supply chain crunch and then the Suez Canal. Like we had one container of someone's products just fall off the ship right after the retailer that bought it filed Chapter 11. And we're like, how many more things can go wrong? And these CEOs, they just one step at a time. Let's solve this problem, then solve the next problem, and then solve the next problem. They have seemingly endless stamina. And so I need a test for that. You can get a sense when you talk to them about their previous experience, where they see this thing going, how they talk about the incumbents, how they talk about the first 5 people they've hired and where they're gonna hire from. It comes across in a lot of different ways. I don't have a rubric, but you can sense it when it's there. I also really like personally, and this is just a personal taste for me, founders that are very detail oriented. Because when I think of the Robinhood founders, the Majuri founders, hearing all from my colleague about the Plaid founders, they just know everything about their business. There's not a corner of their business they are not 100%. I asked them, like, how do you know all of this? How? And they're like, what do you mean? Of course. The flip side is you talk to some of their employees, they're like, oh my God, they micromanage more than they need to. But on the other hand, they know everything. And so I look for that, the founder who wants to know everything, who's like, well, what about this? Like, yep, here's to the last decimal point, this number. Or like, what are your margins? Like, my margins for this product is this, for this product, they're not like, oh, actually, I really don't know what my margins are. So I look for that detail, almost like the maniacal detail orientation that I think it requires to build a company that's successful.
Last week or so, I saw a VC, and he's doing some kind of psychological test or survey or something like this for their founders before they want to invest them, which is, I guess, going in the same direction like you said. Okay, I want to test the attitude, perseverance, etc. of the person. Any experience with doing something like a psychological test for that, or during the due diligence? So once you are very, very close to making the final decision, say, let's, okay, we want to invest, maybe getting on some kind of psychological expert, and then like you would do in like a technical due diligence or a commercial due diligence, making a psychological due diligence or something like this.
I haven't done that. I do reference checks. I do the reference that they gave them, and it's typically people that have worked with them in the past, people that have worked with them now. And then I do my own back channel. So for most of the time, I can find second connections on LinkedIn that will happily talk to me about their experience working this person. So I do quite a bit to try to understand the entirety of the founder. But I don't know about psychological tests. I'm not against it. I just try to operate by the golden rule, treat people the way you'd want to be treated. And like, I don't know that I would necessarily love it if an employer was like, I want to do a psychological test. I just feel like that's more invasive, and it just feels like it's just more personal of like a analysis on things that I don't know that I would necessarily be thrilled about it. So if I wouldn't want to do it for an employer, I don't know that I'd want to put prospective founders through that either. But it's just personal choice and preference.
Yeah, but now you are doing it based on your gut feeling or your own kind of model of evaluating the perseverance and quality of the founder. And this would be another data point. And then the question that I was asking, I'm not saying this is a good idea or not. If it were a good investment, assuming like you pay like $1,000 or $2,000 for this kind of test, which would result in you, I don't know, declining 10% of the investments, which would be like to be most likely loss makers if this were really a good correlation between the psychological test and then perseverance and so on. Yeah, which I don't know whether this will be, but if it were, I mean, it might be a good investment. Yeah? The question is only when will you get the feedback data of how good your psychological test was. But it takes too much time, like 5 years or 10 years or whatever, until you get your feedback data. And then maybe the world has changed again. So that's why the question is really how good the predictive power of such a psychological test would be.
Yeah, I see it a bit more like outsourcing a chunk of your diligence. It's just you're outsourcing it to a test versus outsourcing it to a consulting agency. I don't know. I like to do my own diligence. So at the end of the day, if I was wrong, I was wrong. It wasn't like, oh, that test was wrong and that's why I made the investment. I kind of want to take responsibility for it. You know, for me to trust a psychological test to tell me whether a founder has the personality traits we're looking for, I would just worry that does it bias towards a certain gender? Does it bias towards a certain race? Does it bias towards a certain culture? Does it bias towards a certain age? And so like I would need to see so much data to see and so much historical, like, yes, we caught all of these people and they were a wide, diverse range of people. So it doesn't discriminate based on a lot of things, which most tests do discriminate. And then I'd have to make sure that like it didn't filter out the next like greatest founder out there. Because if I turned down a founder because a test told me to turn them down and then end up being like, the next Mark Zuckerberg, I'm going to be really upset.
And maybe even that's the case. Most founders who build like billion-dollar companies, they have some kind of psychological damage. So how do you test for the not normal? Because starting a company or building a billion-dollar company is not the normal thing. And how do you test for anomalies?